So Alan, well, loved rugby, as you do, and he was the sports strapper for the rugby team, local rugby team, and he decided that he'd put the boots back on and have a bit of a run. So he did that and loved every minute of it. And but we would often have the discussion, you know, because he would work, he was an outdoor worker. He loved all the farms and plantations, and he did horticulture. So he was just very active, running hills, eating 13 bananas a day, drinking 8 litres of water a day while he's up and down these hills. And we just said, you know, if anything was ever to happen, you know, the whole life, everything would change. You wouldn't be able to work. You know, we often talked about it because he was only a thin man. He wasn't a big, bulky guy. Like my brothers all played rugby and they were all big, bulky guys. But yeah, so he just went to play in the grand final, and they set for a scrum, and Al said, I wasn't 1/100th of a second completely set upon impact. And he said, and when the scrum impacted, he said, I knew straight away. He said, I called Mayday, which is everyone backs off, and rugby code for leave me and I need help. Even his best mate, who was one of his props, is going, come on, Al, get up and play the ball. And yeah, so Alan knew that. Alan knew something very serious had happened. And then it went from there. So that was, I got the phone call at 11:30 on Saturday, the 31st of August, 2002. And we had a 6-year-old, and I was 6 months pregnant with Bethany. So the story began and the whole world changed. You know, lots of doors closed, but so many doors opened. New people came along, and our lives were very enriched by Al's journey. He went by helicopter to North Shore, and then the rugby people flew me down that afternoon, and that's where I found Al lying in the special emergency care room with bolts that long drilled into either side of his skull to try and use traction to take the pressure off his spinal cord. So his spinal cord was injured he broke 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 vertebrae, and number 3 and 4 was where all the damage was to his spinal cord. And so damaging a spinal cord and squashing it like a tomato it doesn't often come back from that. So it's kind of like being severed, but anyway, so because it was such a high level, he lost that night his lungs and diaphragm shutting down and struggling to breathe. So they intubated him and then took away his only method of communication, which was his speech. So we had to learn and go through those next month in ICU, learning how to breathe through the ventilator. And then he just looked at me and said, I want to be able to do this myself. And I just said to him, you're the only person who can do anything about it. So off he went. I switched the head on, and then he just went for it. And then every day he would blow the spirometer around, and they'd said, if you can get it to there, Al, we'll give you 10 minutes off. And so he just kept going until one day he had an hour off, and then he had 2 hours off. And just his sheer determination. And that's how he taught himself how to breathe through his diaphragm. And that's what it do. And it looked hilarious because you look at him and it was only his tummy that moved up and down, you know, but he taught himself how to breathe again. And he's just really super strong physically and mentally to be able to overcome that, because he should have been a ventilated quad. He was also chin driven on his chair. That's how he drove his chair. And he just said, no, this isn't cutting it either. So he started to go to rehab. And you know, rehab for a high level complete quadriplegic is very different from a very low level paraplegic or a low level quad where there's an end in sight. We've got some hope here. But he just went in and he just thought, if I can build my shoulders up and my neck, I might be able to get forward and back and pronate and supinate my arms so that I can manage, you know, like a little metal thing that his hand would sit into. And that's what he did. And then he learned how to drive his chair with his hand and not his chin, which was great. And then we learnt how to try and feed. We'd get a mobile arm support on his chair so he could feed himself, but that was hit and miss. There was food that would fly everywhere, but that's okay. And then he learnt how to do it himself. So he would balance. So he had absolutely no torso balance, no hand or arm movements really. Anything that you saw from Al was from his shoulders and a little tiny bit under here, that was it. But he taught himself how to do everything. It was like, I'll learn one thing, then I'll learn another. So he always had something to strive for. But you know, he never ever said, I don't want to be here. Never ever, that didn't ever come into his vocab. He just always said, I wish that I had hands so I could hold my new baby, or I can help Gabby, or you know, those kind of practical things that a dad would do. That's what he wanted more than anything else. So I said, well, you can learn, you can love them just the same, you just learn how to do it differently. So he did. So Beth was on his wheelchair, on the foot plates, and spent her whole growing up on the foot plates of his chair. And when she was too big, she was on a skateboard on the back. But she was 2 years old and 3 years old, and she could open the disabled toilets with the key. She could order him a coffee. She could feed him. She could do his EFTPOS card. And she was a tiny little kid that could do all that. You just learn. You learn how to live life differently. So yeah, that was it for Ali. He got to as good as he could, and I came home to try and find somewhere for us to live, and I had a new baby and a 6-year-old. And then while he stayed there, because they stopped the rehab, you know, there was other pressing young people coming in, unfortunately, and he would then go and counsel them and talk to them. And that's how he filled up his time until it was time to come back. And then learn how to live life in a house without nurses and doctors and equipment that they have. So we had no knowledge except what they were passing on. But now I could help somebody. You know, if they were coming home now, I could go, these are all the things you need to think about. You know, like the first day I left Al and he didn't have any water to drink. Like, I didn't even think. Al didn't even think. So we just had to learn by mistakes and learn a new life. And then when melanoma came along, learn a new life again. Melanoma presented itself 7 years ago now, because Al's passed, but Al had just like a little pink spot on his chest, and it wasn't annoying, it wasn't itchy, nothing about it, it was just there. Anyway, every morning when the carers would dry him, they'd knock it and it'd bleed. And so it was more annoying for him. He was also on blood thinners, and so that would become a bit of an issue for him. So yeah, he just decided, we'll make an appointment, go down to see our doctors who have a skin doctor in their practice. And Dr. Nick had a look at it and he said, I'm just going to take a little biopsy. And then he rang up just a few days later to say, look, it's all, you know, I'm concerned about it. It is melanoma. And he said it's already a level 3 on the Breslow scale. So he said, I'd like to, you know, take it out as best I can with a good margin. And of course, Al being quite thin, you know, a good margin right there on the chest was quite difficult, but he got the margin and then sent that off, and of course it came back, and it was quite a rare melanoma. And then we went off to another doctor, Dr. Roussos, and he then did the further investigations and gave us the depths and all the parameters and what we should do. And of course, Alan being a quadriplegic, he decided what he wanted to do. So he said, yes, look, let's take it out, take as much margin as you can, check the central node, check the axillae node, and if they're all clear, leave me be. So that's what we did. We went and had a PET scan in Lismore. They didn't have one here at that stage. And then we went and all the parameters, they were all clear. So Al carried on with life. And then it was 5 years later that it came back. So that was the unusual story about Al's melanoma, was that nothing where the original site was. It was all obviously internal. So Al had obviously decreased appetite. He was quite tired all the time, which is a natural quad thing as well, but also more tired. And we had some issues with his air expiry and intake was becoming more shallow. And so we would go off and, you know, see Matt, our doctor, and get all the checks done, blood work, whatever. And, you know, it would come back, and Matt said, he actually rang on New Year's Eve and said, look, I think Al needs to go to the hospital. And I said, why? And he goes, well, because his sodium levels are extremely low. And I said, it's New Year's Eve, Matt. And he goes, no. He said, I really want him to go. I said, what can happen? And he said he can have a seizure. And I looked up, and Al was right in the middle of a seizure. As I'm talking to Matt, I said, I've got to go. And then rang the ambulance, and he was having trouble trying to get air. So we went to the hospital, and they're always fantastic with Al out there, even though it's a fairly big deal when someone Al's level comes in, but then trying to investigate, you know, and find out what caused the seizure. So they were looking for clots in all the organs, brain, heart, everywhere. And there was some damage to one of the kidneys that hadn't been evident any time before. So, but they did remark that there was several nodules in the abdomen. And then they kind of were looking more at the organs and stuff. And so after that, the spinal team come every February and do a complete clinic on Al. And I said to Dr. James, who had been our spinal professor for 20 years, I said, James, there's something you can see. Alan's very unwell. And he said, yes, I can. He said, well, I'll read all the information. And then I started to talk about the nodules in his abdomen. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, there's nodules in there that are there. They said that they were unremarkable, I think is the word that and didn't really comment too much. And he said, I'd like them investigated. And it would have been 2 weeks, and he rang. It's melanoma all through Al's abdomen. And it was really weird because when I was dressing him one day and laid him flat on the bed, and his body spasms every time you lay him out, his body spasms, but his stomach's always quite distended because he would breathe through his diaphragm. That's how he taught himself how to breathe again. So his stomach would move more here as you breathe, whereas we move here. And as he was doing that, I noticed all these craters on his stomach. More where his catheter, suprapubic catheter was, more close to where his colostomy bag was. So it was kind of like ports that shouldn't be there. That's where they kind of went to those areas. And yeah, then he was diagnosed. We were in contact with the oncology team here. We were actually in Sargood in Sydney at the time when Professor James rang, and then the ball kind of rolled from there. But was a lot of investigation into where do we go from here, considering the place Al was at, 20 years already a quad. What are we going to do about this? So we had to research what was available, what the actual side effects were going to be for someone like Al, because quadriplegia and a stage 4 metastatic melanoma diagnosis don't really go hand in hand. There's not really much information about how Al's body is going to react to what's going on. So we researched a lot. We visited the oncology team, and the team out here they're awesome. And then we came to our decision of what we thought was the best thing for Al, and completely all his decisions. So I just had to go along with whatever he wanted to do. And getting up each day for Al was a 4-hour journey with carers, and just to get from bed to his chair seated for the day, it took 4 hours every morning. So adding in treatments and a whole regime of that when he's already had 4 hours to get in the chair. Any treatment he was going to have was going to be hoisting, lifting over to, radio or immunotherapy. But it just didn't look very good for Al. His choices were, I don't like what that's going to do to me. He said, I think that I'd rather just live for as long as I can and just have whatever I've got is going to go with me. And so we went and we talked and we researched, and we found out that it was 40% that might give him some time. And he said, I'll just take my chances. So he decided not to have the immunotherapy. There was only one on offer for him, and he decided that it was just time to live. And that's what we did for 2 years. And he lived, I think he lived longer, because he just chose, he's pretty headstrong. He just chose that this is my path. I'm going to have a peaceful, happy journey. And that's what, we all tried to go with him. It was hard when he first said to me, and he said, I want you to make the decision with me. And I went, no, it's your decision, it's your life. You have to make it. Ultimately, I'll go with whatever you want to do. So, that was a tough decision, but it was his decision to make. And he was tired. He was really tired. But he made the decision and off we went. And we lived life. And we didn't go back to the hospital. So, which was great. And not that he hated the hospital, but it wasn't the place for him. Home was where he just wanted to be. Because everything was there. And all of his family and friends were there. Everyone knew where to find him, so it was easy for him there. Sadly enough, we had a very good relationship with the palliative team in this area through past family members. So when the diagnosis happened and we went and researched and Al made his decision, we then spoke with some of our friends on the team. And we also spoke with some of the treating doctors in the oncology who were also our close friends. So, and they still, even though Al was palliative, some of these were uncomfortable. So there was a little bit of radiation done to try and disperse some of the ones that were maybe in fear of blocking catheters. So that all happened pretty quickly. They organised all that. But ultimately the palliative team came straight in and set up like a beautiful young doctor who was only just new on the team. And she, I don't know if it's okay to mention her name, but her name was Charlie, and she was amazing. She came at Al's beck and call. And if we didn't understand something, or she would drive home on the way past from work and call in and see, just to check in and see how Al's going. But just navigating melanoma and quadriplegia of Al's level was so hard for them and for us. So we would deal with the physical responses happening all the time, and Alan's emotional and spiritual well-being, we dealt with all of that. And then they were in the background dealing with all of the other things that go along with palliative care. So anyone we needed, they would have someone there as quick as they could to help. Whatever, they'd teach me how to use the medication in the ports on his stomach. So I had no problem being able to do that. They even taught the girls how to do that. If I was, the very few moments that I wasn't there, they could administer whatever he needed in his regime. So they just became part of our family, really, the whole team. And it didn't matter who walked in the door, and Al had a very good rapport with every single one of them. Sometimes really bad. They would just call in as a friend sometimes, some of them who had known us for a long, long time. They also switch around in different community outreach from the hospital. So we had met some of them in different fields. So I think for them too, it becomes a little, even though you're not really supposed to be personal, but it does. You can't help but love Al. People always formed relationships with him. So yeah, there was a big community and they devastated, you know, when I would keep them all updated all the time. So yeah, but palliative care is nice to have. But it's also a have to have. But for us, yeah, they were part of our family. They were part of the journey, and they made it so much better. Because Al is a high level quad, he always found hospital so hard because, you know, he needed so much equipment and he needed so much care that we had everything on board. But we also had to love his carers who could come into our space. Our home could run like normal. Al's life could run like normal. And yeah, they just all would come there. So for him, he found peace. There was peace at our house. He made lots of little areas around the place, peaceful spots. And he wanted to protect that for as long as he could and always be there. So he knew that he could die the way he wanted to and in the place that he wanted to. So that's what we did. And I don't regret any of that. It was the most beautiful experience with all of our people who loved him dearly. They were all there. They were all part of it. Everyone was welcome. And, you know, if they didn't come, well, I can't change that for them, but everybody was welcome. And Al knew it and he loved it. And he was going out right to the end. Even Will, his beautiful mate Will, who was his carer for so long, came to see him to say goodbye. And the palliative nurse said, "Oh, I don't think Al's going to respond to you, Will." Anyway, Al just opened his eyes and he looked at Will. I won't say the swear word. And he said, "I haven't freaking finished with you yet." And Will just, he lost it. He just said, "Right, I'm good to go now." He's still there. Yeah, he was just like that, you know, and he made other people feel better. Even though he was passing. It was just awesome. So we only had 3 days where he didn't speak. And he truly was, I could see he was on a very peaceful journey. And that for me was the greatest reward, that he was happy and he died graciously and humbly. He didn't even make a sound. I had to get the girls to watch him. Everyone was on watch. Said, "If you see a change, you let me know." And yeah, he was just gracious. Just like he normally would be. He would have been just lying in there watching everybody going, "Right, I'm not going to make a song and dance, so I'm just going to go out my way." So, did I tell you before that the girls put the Princess Diaries on the television? I think that's what did it in the end. Do you know how many times that poor bloke's watched those movies with 2 girls? Oh, they put that on. I went, oh no, the poor fella. No wonder he went to sleep. Oh dear. He could bring people together and hold people together. He had 800 people at his living wake, which was his funeral. He had 800 people come through the door. And that's Al. This is where he grew up, this is where he was born, and they just all surrounded him all the time, which was awesome. You know, people were there for the right reasons. So, and I think he gave back. You know, he gave back in the way, like people would come in and not really know what to say, and then they'd leave and go, far out, he made me feel better. The handbag is a classic story. Lois, she and Matt are they were amazing doctors, still are for the girls and I, but they're also good mates too, so love them to death. But Al would always stir Lois and she stir him. And so he said to her, when they actually came on that Sunday night to say that, "We're here, Al, that place that we've been talking about," he said, "We're actually here." And it was like someone flicked a switch for Al. And he goes, "Really?" And then he said to Matt, "How long do you think, Matt?" He goes, "Oh, by the end of the week, you'll be sleeping." And then it's exactly what happened. So he said to Lois, "Well, Lois, I don't want to go in any garden or under a tree or out in the ocean." He said, "I just want to stalk her in her handbag every day of her life." So the day he died, Lois bought this beautiful handbag, and here we are, we have Al. And he's still very much a part of our lives. He goes everywhere I go. And he has sleepovers with the kids. And now that we have a little granddaughter, Lola, we call him Party. He goes on the floor on her playmat and she pulls him over and she's up to nearly crawling. So he's very much a part of our life, but husband in a handbag. Yeah, and that's where he's been ever since. And there's even pictures in there, the kids all drawing pictures, they're all in there with him. He's got his travel papers in there when it's time to travel. And yeah, Al goes with me. That's it, on the journey. Yeah, he goes to the pub, yeah. And every time you go there with the rugby old boys, there's always a black beer right there. And one of the guys at the end will go, oh, well, someone may as well drink it. So someone to drink it. But yeah, they always pour him a beer. Buy him a beer, pour him a beer. Yeah, it's good fun. And they love it too. I always say to them, I just walk in and hand him straight to them and off they go, do their boy things. Yeah, it's good value. But I leave him with the kids sometimes. You know, if the kids need to have Al's presence, pep them up a bit, I just leave him in there with them, and now Lola plays all over him. I could imagine she'll be dragging him as she starts to walk. Poor old Al. Get ready for it. Yeah, but he's very much a part of our life and he always will be.